there's a couple of ways to set the budget, the promotional budget. Okay. These are just a few ways. One view is that promotion in general is good. By promotion, I mean advertising, sales promotion, PR, whole gamut. So whatever money you have, put it towards promotion because it cannot hurt. It'll make you money. The belief being that you put in $1, you'll get back more than $1 in terms of sales. So whatever money you have, put it in. That's all you can afford approach. The second was percentage of sales. Let's say your last year's sales was $10 million. Some companies will say, this year we will spend 2% of last year's sales on advertising or promotions. 2% on promotion. And so how much would that be? 2% of 10 million?
2 million?
Sorry?
$200,000.
$200,000? Okay. What is the problem with this idea, this notion?
But they're taking from last year's profit?
Last year's sales.
Sales.
So last year you made $10 million in sales. This year you spend 2% off whatever you made last year. And 2% happens, the company makes 2% as a rule. They'll always spend 2% of sales. What is the problem with this method? Yeah.
I guess possibly it's putting too much faith in advertising driving sales.
You can kind of see it that way. Although we're looking at promotion, not just advertising, but yeah, agreed. In the sense that the effects of advertising typically don't pay off in about 6 months or a year. It takes about 2-3 years to show effects. Yeah. What else is flawed about this idea? Think about the economy right now. Yeah.
You may not make that much money later. You may not make that much money from sales in general. So setting, when you say 2%, is that like the standard that they will do?
Yeah, a lot of companies will do this. They have to set up have a number in place.
Right.
What our ad budget is going to be. A lot of companies do this.
Is
It's going to
that
be 5%
number,
of sales, 2% of sales, and so on. Yeah,
is
sorry.
that number always the same?
Usually.
Okay, so
Yeah.
then 1 year you may kill in sales, and you can, you have a lot of money to spend next from the percentage of it. But if you don't do so good in sales, then you may not have that money to spend. You see what I mean?
So you want to build a little more on that? You're going in the right direction. Can you build up more on that? So if you had a really horrible year, last
So if
year
you
was
had a really
bad
horrible year, and let's say, all right, so let's say in 2009 you did great, and the percentage of sales you were going to spend, let's say, is 10. So in 2009 you did great, but then in 2010 you did terrible, but you still have to spend that 10%. You may not, that 10% may be a lot from the sales revenue from 2010. Do you see what I mean? Like, you may be spending more.
If you get a really, really bad year,
than 10.
a really, really bad year, then what you're saying is, what you really need to do if you've had a bad year is to sell more, right? So if last year was really bad in terms of sales, what you need next year to be is a much better year.
Yeah, yeah.
What this system argues, or this formula argues, is that if you had a bad year,
Spend more.
it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost here right now. If you had a bad year, you spend less on advertising, leading your next year to be even worse. So that's what percentage of sales is. A lot of people say, although it's widely used, it's not the best method to be used in this regard. If you're coming out of recession, now you should be advertising very, very hard instead of cutting back. But percentage of sales would say, you calculate your percentage on a smaller base. Last year's really obliterated sales, which means this year's advertising budget will be really small. And true enough, you'll see this. A lot of ad agencies, which basically manage advertising for a lot of companies, lost their accounts over the course of the last 2 years because companies cut back on advertising. It's very counterintuitive, but a lot of companies do actually do this. Excuse me. Second, third method is competitor parity. You look at how much your competitors are spending. If your competitor is spending, let's say, $2 million, you spend $2 million. If you see yourself as being like your competitor, you spend $2 million because your competitor spent $2 million. Example: if Pepsi spends $2 million in advertising, they spend way more than that. But Deborah, do you sit somewhere? No, not here. You're blocking the camera. Yeah, you recorded. You want to sit right here?
No, not there.
Jennifer, you want to sit right here? Okay. So, what's the thing? Okay. Pepsi is going to look at how much Coke is spending, and if Pepsi sees themselves as being at par with Coke, they'll spend the same amount Coke is spending. Now, the last method is probably the most, I guess, the best method, but also the most difficult to implement. Let's say a company, like one of your companies, the marketing plan, you set up a goal that your promotional goal is to make sure that by the end of the year, you have 10% of the people asked to name the top GPS companies would mention your brand, assuming you're working with GPSs. So you want to make sure that top of mind recall is very high by the end of the year. You want at least 10% people to be able to recall your brand name when they're asked to name GPS companies. So assuming at time 0, the beginning of the first year, it's, let's say 0, 0 or maybe it's 1%, you set the goal up and you ask yourself, what do I need to do to make sure that 10% people will recall my brand when they're asked names of GPS companies, GPS makers? And then you go work backwards and figure out, okay, what do I need to do for this? How many times do I have to show somebody an ad in order for them to remember my brand name? A lot of people say you need to mention the name at least 3 times. At least 3 times for people to remember, register it. So let's say we have a goal of making people notice our name in an advertisement on TV 5 times. To get 10% people to notice your brand 5 times, you got to start thinking now. Just pick any one person. Think of a fictitious person. This fictitious person has got to see your ad 5 times on TV. So how many times do you think you should have to run the ad? Realizing that this fictitious John Doe is not constantly watching TV. Many more than 5 times, right? Because there's no guarantee every time you run your ad, John Doe will watch it. So you have to pay, let's say, 50 times, 50 times. So you figure out now, how much does 50 impressions cost? And then you do the math. So it's an example of the objective and task method. As you can see, it's full of a lot of assumptions and a lot less straightforward than the other 3 methods. But these are the 4 most widely used methods to decide on the budget. Any questions about this chapter? What I'm going to do is I'm also going to post a video later on the blog about Clearasil and how they created an interesting integrated marketing communications campaign for Russia using a lot of social media. So I'll post that when it's on there. It's very instructive of integrated marketing communications. Okay.